suspects are being. One case involves the FBI is now offering $100,000 to see if the police are releasing.
Welcome to Misty Mysteries, a true crime podcast where once a week I bring you an unsolved or mysterious case on Wednesday. The true crime fact for this week is Yellowstone National Park has an area called the Murder Zone. This area of the park is about 15 miles and has parts that is Wyoming, Idaho, and Montana. If a crime takes place there, this portion of Yellowstone is unpopulated, meaning no potential jury members live in the area. So with no jury, there can be no trial. There is multiple solutions that have been suggested by lawmakers, but none have solved this issue, making it the murder zone. This week, I am going to be talking about the disappearance of Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, two young women that never came back from a hike.
Have you heard of Anchor? Anchor is the easiest way to make a podcast. When I started Misty Mysteries, I didn't know where to go, and Anchor helped me get Misty Mysteries started without charging me an arm and a leg. Anchor is really my suggestion for anyone looking to start a podcast. It has tools that allow you to record and edit in-app or on the website. Anchor distributes your podcast on all the listening places such as Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Good Pods, and all your favorite listening places. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place, and best of all, it's totally free, all on Anchor FM and on the Anchor app.
Now, before I start the story, I'd like to give a warning that there's a lot of Dutch names and names in Spanish, which are not my native languages. So just bear with me for any words that are mispronounced, and I do apologize in advance. Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon were close friends who grew up together in Amersfoort, Netherlands. Lisanne Froon was born September 24th, 1991, to Dini and Peter Froon. She has been described as intelligent and optimistic. Kris Kremers was born August 9th, 1992, to Rolly Grit and Hans Kramer. She has been described as creative and responsible. Kris and Lisanne were such good friends that they even went to college together, where Lisanne graduated with a degree in applied sciences and Kris with a degree in cultural social education and emphasis on art education. After college, Lisanne moved into Kris's apartment with her, where they worked at the same cafe restaurant to save money for travel and adventure. The women wanted to learn cultures and help people, especially children, while they traveled. They saved enough money to take their first trip 6 months into working at the cafe. They booked and planned a trip to Panama, where they wanted to explore, hike, learn Spanish, learn the culture, celebrate their college graduation, and volunteer to help the children in Panama. This trip was 6 weeks and started on March 15th, 2014. Lisanne and Kris spent the first 2 weeks of their trip going to all the touristy places, which included lots of restaurants, hikes, and important monuments. Panama is a country in Central America. It has beaches, jungles, and rainforests, and mountains and volcanoes. The women, after about 2 weeks, on March 29th, made it to Phuket, where they were staying with the host family while they would volunteer at a local school in that area. Kris would keep a diary of their trip, and she would note that the school was kind of upset with them that they were a week early. So, with a week free, on April 1st, Kris and Lisanne woke up and met with 2 Dutchmen for brunch before hiking with the host family's dog, who either goes by Azul or Blue. Most accounts say Azul, so that's what I'm going to be going with. On the hiking trail Sendero El Pianist, which I butchered, but it translates to the piano player. This hike is about 3 to 4 hours, And it wasn't difficult, especially for experienced hikers like Lisanne and Kris, who had been hiking for the past 2 weeks. It was recommended on the hike that the women stayed on the trail and returned the same way that they came. But later that day, the dog, Azul, or Blue, returned to the restaurant, but without the girls. But when it became dark and Lisanne and Kris hadn't returned and the dog had, the host family got worried. The family searched for them, but didn't report them missing that night. April 2nd came, and the women were still gone for a day now without communicating to the host family where they were staying, and without proper equipment or enough food or water to be camping or hiking overnight. And on top of this, Lisanne and Kris missed an appointment with a tour guide that they had scheduled for 8 a.m. So that day, on April 2nd, Lisanne and Kris were reported missing to the Panama law enforcement. And on April 3rd, locals to the area and the host family got together to conduct a search for Kris and Lisanne, but nothing was found and no evidence of the women being there was found. And it wasn't until April 6th that the family of the girls finally got to Panama, and they flew in with Dutch law enforcement. The Dutch law enforcement brought dogs who specialized in finding missing people and were trained to find people with even the hardest of scents. The Panama police, Dutch police, the families, and local volunteers all searched for the women. The dogs smelt scent of the women on the trail very easily, but when the people were searching aside the dogs, they couldn't find any signs of the women besides, what the dogs were smelling. And after hours of searching on April 6th, the women's families gathered money of $30,000, but I'm not 100% sure what the currency was that it was in, but I'm gonna say it's not dollars. It may have been pesos. So this was for anyone who could help find Kris or Lisanne or knew anything. The Dutch detectives, after searching and being on the trail, started to suspect foul play. One of the detectives saying the women could not have simply disappeared from the trail. This was because when they got on the trail, they noticed that it was easy and it would be kind of weird for the women to disappear from it. Then this was the first time that foul play was even suspected, and the Dutch police started to question some people. First, they questioned the men that Kris and Lisanne talked to before going on their hike, but nothing really came of all these questions, and Kris and Lisanne were still gone and seemingly kind of disappeared without a trace. This was until 10 weeks after Kris and Lisanne went missing. A woman planting rice next to the river found Lisanne's backpack floating in the river. She had been working in the area for a while. She told police that the bag definitely was not there before. Plus, it was in perfect condition, and everything found inside was in good condition. The items found in the backpack were $83 in cash, Lisanne's passport, an empty water bottle, a digital camera, 2 bras, and 2 phones, obviously being Kris and Lisanne's. And on top of, like I said, being in good condition, the backpack was also neatly packed, and it was all dry, even though it was in the river. These items did provide some evidence for the police, especially the phones and the camera. So once they were charged, the evidence found on the phones kind of helped digitally show the story of what the girls' days were like. Before I go over the evidence and the phone activity, that the 2 phones didn't have service during the times because they were in the jungle, and the girls had been turning the phones on and off to preserve the battery. Let's kind of get into Kris's iPhone activity. So on April 1st at 4:30 p.m., there was an attempt to call 112, which is the international number for help. And on April 2nd at 8:14 a.m., 112 was attempted again. On April 3rd at 9:33 a.m., 911, the help number for Panama, was attempted, along with a signal check at 4 p.m. On April 4th at 10:16 a.m. and 1:42 p.m., there was signal checks. On April 5th at 10:50 a.m. and 1:37 p.m., there was signal checks again. And on April 6th at 10:26 a.m. and 1:37 p.m., there were signal checks. Then on the 7th and the 10th of April, there were 77 failed attempts to unlock Kris's phone. And on April 11th, there was one last signal check at 10:51 a.m. and then the phone died at 11:56 a.m. Now for Lisanne's Samsung Galaxy, on April 1st at 4:50 p.m., 112 was attempted. On April 2nd at 6:58 a.m., there was an attempt for 112, and then at 10:53 a.m. and 1:56 p.m., there were attempts for 112 and 911. On April 3rd at 1:50 p.m. and 4:19 p.m., there were signal checks. On April 5th at 4:50 a.m., there was a signal check, and at 5 a.m., Lisanne's phone died. Now, for the evidence found in the digital camera, there had been 100 photos taken from April 1st to April 8th. On April 1st, 10 photos were taken. That actually seemed pretty normal for vacation photos for friends. It was Lisanne and Kris posing on the start of the trailhead, and they were just posing, taking normal pictures. And some were even of Kris kind of off guard, walking or like turning around, looking at Lisanne, and everything just kind of seemed normal. And on April 8th, there was 90 photos taken, and they were of the ground, and then one of which looked like the back of Kris's head. Police believe that the women were using the camera as a flashlight for those 90 photos to kind of see where they were going. The photos were taken from 1 a.m. and every 2 minutes, which is why people believe they were using the camera to kind of see the ground. Most of the photos you can't really make out of what it is due to the flash and it being dark and it not really being of anything. The photo believed to be Kris's head, you can't tell if it's the back or the front of her head, but some claim they see an injury on her temple. Looking at the photo myself, I personally couldn't see anything, but I feel like it just depends on what you're looking for. Maybe I wasn't looking for the right thing. The backpack and what was found in it was the first sign of the woman since April 1st, and would be the last till a few days later where they found Kris's shorts. And now some sources say they were folded neatly on top of a rock, and then some say they were floating in the river, which I feel like both of those are very different, and they paint a different picture based on if her shorts were folded nicely on a rock or if they were floating in the river. After her shorts, not much was found until 2 months later, when not too far from where the backpack and the shorts were found, there were human remains found in a hiking boot. So it was a foot left in a hiking boot and a pelvic bone. And 33 more bones were found not too far from those. 28 of the bones were identified as Lisanne's, including the foot by DNA, and some were identified as Kris, which was the pelvis, by the DNA. Now, what was found about the bones gets kind of weird. Kris's bones had been bleached, while Lisanne's seemed to be in a state of natural decomposition. Kris's bones compared to a person who had been deceased for 2 years. Obviously, she was not deceased for 2 years. Kris's bones had been bleached by lime, which is not native to their soil. So why did Lisanne naturally look like it was decomposition? And also there was 3 other sets of DNA on some of the bones. Who were the other people? Let's kind of get into the theories around Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon's disappearance and deaths. With no overnight camping or hiking supplies or equipment, the calls from 911 and 112, and the state of the women's bodies while they were found, we know something bad happened to them. Forensic teams from the Netherlands and Panama couldn't agree on if the women suffered from a hiking accident or something more sinister. One of the most popular theories, Lisanne and Kris got lost in the woods and couldn't find a way out. Not having supplies they needed, or food or water, the women starved to death. Now this is obviously the most probably logical explanation. Second is something happened to either Kris or Lisanne. They fell or they hurt themselves, and the other woman turned around or tried to get help and got lost themselves. Now, the issue with this, the evidence that was found, doesn't support the fact that the women were ever separated. And another kind of more popular theory that's a little bit like that one was that Kris got hurt and Lisanne tried to get help, which could be why Kris's phone had so many attempted unlocks and why maybe Lisanne's had more of the calls, and then also why there was a photo of Kris's head. And then we kind of get into foul play theories, which range from a lot of different things from cannibals to kidnapping. So some believe that the women were kidnapped from that hiking trail by either locals to the area or a tour guide. They did something to harm and kill the women. Considering there's the other sets of DNA, that if something did happen where they were kidnapped, then someone was also doing it to other people or women. And then there's also that maybe the women ran into a group of cannibals that live in that hiking area or jungle, and you can kind of imagine that they ate the women. There is also that a wild animal may have hunted them through the forest, and people back up this theory by saying the 90 photos taken on the camera that one day could have been to use flash and to scare that animal hunting them. In such an isolated place, like a jungle, and a struggle to really even find any evidence, we may never know exactly what happened to Kris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, but what we do know is they were 2 young women and they went on a hike, and by the evidence, something really bad happened to them, and it should not have. I would like to thank you for listening to this week's episode. I apologize for missing last week. If you don't have the podcast on social media, you may hear a little bit in my voice. I got hit with a cold and I lost a week of time, but I'm feeling a lot better now, getting over it. I'd like to thank you for listening to this week's episode, and I really hope you enjoy this podcast. And if you do, please leave good reviews, and please share the podcast with your friends and family. And then you can find us, the podcast, on social media, and that's Twitter at Mysterious Misty. So MySteriesMisty, and then Instagram at Misty_mysteries. That's MISTY_MYSTERIES. My dyslexic did not like that. You can also find all of the podcast links to social media and all the fun podcast listening places on my link tree in the episode description. As always, I'd like to thank all of my sources, and they can always be found in the episode's description. I thank you for listening, and I hope you tune in next week.